All right, well, welcome everyone to this evening's webinar featuring registered dietitian Jillian Greaves and Rose McKenzie from Mira. Jillian is going to be sharing her insight into using day-to-day hormone tracking as a complement to traditional laboratory testing, offering deeper insight into ovulation status, luteal phase adequacy, estrogen-progesterone balance, and cycle variability. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. If you have questions for Jillian or Rose, please add them to the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. If you can't see the Q&A button, you may need to click on the three dots on the right-hand side where it says More and select Q&A. We'll do a Q&A after the educational portion and do it again after the promotional section. I will share a link to the CE survey towards the end of the educational portion of the webinar, and I'll also share the link to the slides and resources once we get started. After the educational portion of the webinar, Rose will be sharing some amazing practitioner information from Mira, so please stay on to learn more about the company and what they can offer for your practice. So as I'm getting ready to introduce the speakers, we'd love to hear where everyone is joining us from this evening. So put into the chat and let us know where you're located. And I would like to start by introducing the speakers. So first we have Jillian Greaves, who is a functional dietitian and women's health specialist. She's the owner of a private practice, Jillian Greaves Functional Nutrition and Wellness, and the creator of the PCOS Root Reversal Program. Jillian provides comprehensive nutrition and lifestyle counseling to women with a special emphasis on PCOS, fertility, hormone balance, and digestive health. Jillian and her team help women identify and address the root cause of their hormone and digestive symptoms using advanced laboratory testing, personalized nutrition, and supportive lifestyle therapies as the first line of intervention. It's her mission to empower women to take back control of their health, reclaim their confidence, and experience life at its fullest potential. Rose McKenzie is the clinical manager at Mira, where she assists healthcare professionals in effectively integrating Mira's hormone monitoring tool into their practices. Rose is well equipped to provide education and support to providers and fertility awareness educators. Additionally, Rose brings nearly a decade of experience as a natural family planning instructor, specializing in the MarTech and symptothermal method. I will turn it over to Jillian. Thank you both so much for joining us this evening.
All right, I'm just gonna share my screen here. All right, can everyone see this okay? All right, great. Awesome. So thank you so much for that introduction. I can kind of skip over the piece about who I am and what I do. I think you guys have a pretty clear sense there. So we'll just kind of dive right in. So ultimately, in terms of continuous hormone tracking, there were some really big problems that I kept seeing in practice with clients. So women were tracking symptoms using different apps, using wearable devices, but they were really kind of lacking the physiological data to connect the dots. Women were also coming to us more and more frequently with assumptions about hormonal health and almost even self-diagnosing in terms of things that they read online or on social media. And we'd have women filling out applications to work with us saying, I have estrogen dominance, I have low progesterone. But again, not really having the data to back that up or to really connect the dots with what was going on in their body. We also have women that reach out to us constantly that are struggling with really significant cyclical symptoms, but they have a regular period. They had lab work done and they were told that all of their labs look normal and that their only option is birth control in terms of symptom management. So in terms of continuous hormone tracking, I was really looking for a tool for myself and my team to really be able to kind of gather more comprehensive and more nuanced information that would just give us better insights into what was going on with women. And that ultimately led me to continuous hormone tracking. Traditional hormone tools and labs give us a lot of really valuable information, but most of them are measuring proxies or snapshots of kind of a single point in time. And what these traditional tools often miss is the kind of dynamics of hormones across the entire menstrual cycle. So things like hormone trajectories, the rate of change, the relationship between hormones throughout the cycle, and cycle to cycle variability. To speak to some of these tools specifically, so basal body temp tracking, we know this can confirm ovulation and it can help to estimate luteal phase length. But it's really an indirect measure and it's influenced by sleep, stress, alcohol, travel, circadian rhythm disruption. So there can be a lot of variability there. And it doesn't give us any information about the quality of ovulation, patterns with estrogen throughout the follicular phase, or what's happening with progesterone in the luteal phase. LH strips can detect an LH surge, but they're binary, right? So it's positive or it's negative. And LH strips are a little bit finicky, so they can miss gradual or weak rises in LH. It can miss multiple surges, and it makes them kind of especially unreliable for clients or patients that have polycystic ovarian syndrome, hypothalamic amenorrhea, or that are post birth control, where they're kind of in this big hormone recalibration period. Cycle tracking apps are great for monitoring period bleeds and kind of keeping track of period dates and for tracking symptoms. But most of these period apps are really relying on predictive algorithms based on past cycle averages and population averages. So, not actual, true, real individual hormone data. They can't confirm ovulation, they can't connect the dots or explain what's going on with symptoms. Then we have tools like blood lab testing, Dutch hormone testing, both of which provide really excellent quantitative data that can be incredibly valuable. But the limitation there is that these are still only capturing kind of one snapshot in time. They don't capture that hormone variability, the day-to-day hormonal changes across the cycle. So there's a lot that we can miss. Even with Dutch testing, which we utilize a lot in practice, we get a better assessment of hormone breakdown, processing, clearance, the diurnal pattern with cortisol, which is great. But again, it's sort of this one snapshot in the mid-luteal phase. So this is where continuous hormone tracking really helped to fill in a lot of clinical gaps for us. And it's given us the ability to see real hormonal patterns and trends across the entire cycle. It allows us to kind of understand what exactly is happening with estrogen leading up to ovulation in the follicular phase. We can actually look at the LH surge and any kind of unique patterns with LH for that individual. We can look at that day-to-day rise in progesterone and trends throughout the luteal phase after ovulation. And what I really love is that we can look at cycle variability. So cycle to cycle, we can see what's happening for comparison. I didn't start using continuous hormone tracking because traditional tools, blood labs, or functional lab testing were bad. We still utilize these tools and they're really valuable. But I started using continuous hormone tracking because there were persistent clinical gaps that I felt like they just couldn't fill. One major advantage to continuous hormone tracking is that it provides that quantitative hormone data at home. So again, most at-home hormone tools are qualitative or they're binary, but with continuous hormone tracking tools, we can actually see the numerical values. And that allows us to understand, not just if hormones change, but how much, how quickly, how consistently, so we can really track and assess for patterns. I also really like that continuous hormone tracking gives us the ability to look at multiple hormones together because hormones do not act in isolation, right? So cycle health is really going to depend on the coordination between hormones like our estrogen, our LH, our progesterone, and not just one single marker or one single hormone. We can look at patterns, different hormone patterns where, you could have two women that both ovulate regularly, both have the exact same cycle length, but they're experiencing completely different symptoms. And there are different, hormonal dynamics driving these symptoms. Continuous hormone tracking also ultimately really aligned with kind of how, I already work and how my team operates. So our work is data informed, it's pattern based, and it's not just symptom based. Continuous hormone tracking kind of adds another layer of objective data, especially between more kind of formal or traditional lab tests. So it gives us the ability to monitor patterns, to see how the body is responding, and to kind of continue to connect the dots in real time. The other big thing with continuous hormone tracking is that I've found it's a really incredibly powerful tool for education and for empowerment with clients. When women can actually see their hormones on paper shifting across the cycle, it really builds body literacy, body confidence in terms of how a client's body is communicating with them. It reduces anxiety when clients can actually see what's happening and understand that in relation to what they're experiencing in their body. And it absolutely improves adherence to behavior change when we can have this real-time data to really utilize alongside implementing nutrition and lifestyle strategies. And at the end of the day, it's not about, replacing a client's intuition with data. I want to be clear about that. But really, it's about using and leveraging data to strengthen that intuition and to strengthen that self-trust. Continuous hormone tracking is, like I said, not a replacement for other labs. But when symptoms and standard testing don't fully explain what's happening, that's where continuous hormone tracking really shines. So these on the left side here, you'll see these are a lot of common client cases that we might consider using continuous hormone tracking. And most of these cases, although they look very, very different on this list, they all have one thing in common, which is the problem is not just how much hormone is present. It's timing, it's signaling, it's consistency, it's variability. And traditional hormone labs, they give us a screenshot, right? But continuous hormone tracking kind of gives us the ability to, the way I explain it is we get to watch the whole movie, right? And we can understand the plot fully from start to finish versus that one snapshot in time. Now let's chat through a couple real world case studies. So I want to briefly show you just a couple snapshots of CHT charts, and then we'll do kind of a deeper, full dive into a real client case study from start to finish and kind of talk about how we leverage this data. So this chart is from a client that was experiencing non-ovulatory LH surges. If we were using LH strips, this cycle would likely look ovulatory, when in reality, it wasn't. A period tracking app might assume ovulation occurred based on historical cycle data or based on population data. So what continuous hormone tracking is really showing us here is that this client is experiencing non-ovulatory LH surges without a corresponding, progesterone rise. So ovulation isn't happening. It looks like the body's trying to ovulate here, but it's not happening. And this distinction is really fundamentally important in terms of it changes how we interpret what's happening in the cycle and what might need the most support for a client from an intervention perspective. But without continuous hormone tracking, it would be very easy to kind of misclassify this pattern and what was going on with this client. Here are two other cases or kind of chart examples that involve estrogen excess. So estrogen excess as a whole, but clinically, these are actually very different patterns that would require different support, different interventions. So on the left side here, the key feature is when estrogen is elevated. So after ovulation, this individual has a great, clear, consistent rise with progesterone, which is awesome. But we also have sustained elevation with estrogen in the luteal phase as well. So we have enough progesterone. This isn't a progesterone deficiency situation, but it's being functionally overwhelmed by persistently high estrogen. And that's going to impact progesterone signaling, even though we have enough progesterone. And this unfavorable balance can actually drive a lot of luteal phase symptoms for women. On the right side here, we have a different kind of excess estrogen situation. We have elevated estrogen throughout the follicular phase, and estrogen really remains high and very dominant throughout the remainder of the cycle. Progesterone, we clearly ovulate here, progesterone increases. However, again, estrogen really is the dominant hormone in the luteal phase here. So this picture, this chart is giving us more of an indication of kind of global estrogen excess and a relative estrogen excess dynamic in the luteal phase, where estrogen is really the dominant hormone here. So now I want to walk you through a full client case. So this was our client, Rachel. And the reason I picked this case is because this is a very, very common clinical scenario that we see in practice where standard testing just wasn't giving us the full story. And there was a lot of gray area and question marks. So Rachel is a 37-year-old woman with a diagnosis of IBS, MCAS or mast cell activation syndrome, and unexplained infertility. She ovulates every month and she has a very predictable period. However, she is experiencing a laundry list of symptoms here that really involve metabolic, neurologic, GI, immune, hormonal system. So a lot of symptoms that she was experiencing. Conventional assessment tools and labs led her to being told that all of her labs look normal, despite this laundry list of symptoms that she was experiencing. And to be fair, many of her kind of standard hormone blood labs did fall within normal reference ranges. What we pulled out from traditional labs that she had completed was that despite certain things being within normal reference ranges, her fasting insulin was definitely elevated or outside of what we would consider optimal. Her A1C was elevated. And she did a CGM at home on her own, and we saw a lot of significant glycemic variability. So huge spikes and crashes with blood sugar throughout the day, regardless of, composition of meals. So lots of glycemic variability there. Rachel was then told to eat a low FODMAP diet for her GI issues and to lose weight by restricting calories and exercising more. The advice Rachel received was not malicious, and it was logical on paper based on the data available. She was experiencing gut symptoms that were unexplained, and she had gained a significant amount of weight over the last year. But for someone with fertility challenge, with mast cell activation syndrome, metabolic dysregulation, this approach can actually worsen the underlying physiology here. And this is where continuous hormone tracking became really valuable, not to contradict labs, but to add context that the other labs just couldn't. So let's look at what her hormone patterns actually showed. So this is Rachel's baseline cycle before we made any changes, any interventions. And what I want you to notice is not just the specific hormone values, but also the shape and coordination of hormones and curves or lack thereof throughout her cycle. So we're seeing really suboptimal and relatively kind of flat estrogen in terms of the rise that we would like to see in the follicular phase. Her LH surge is present and she definitely ovulated, but it's very weak. Post ovulation, we do see, progesterone and estrogen increase a little bit, but we're not seeing that expected kind of robust rise in stability in the luteal hormones that we would really like. So the pattern here isn't high estrogen or low progesterone or one single hormone being high or low, right? Really, the problem is inadequate hormone signaling, and ultimately her entire cycle was very underpowered, very underpowered. With seeing these patterns laid out clearly, her symptoms stopped looking random, and we were able to actually start to connect the dots much more clearly with her physiology. And this also explains and kind of confirms why eat less, exercise more restrictive diets did not help and likely worsened this pattern that we're seeing here in the symptoms that she was experiencing. Now let's take a look at Rachel's diet and lifestyle habits. So, interpreting hormone data is step one. The real clinical value and impact comes from understanding why, right? Why do those patterns exist? And that means ultimately connecting them back to daily inputs. Hormones respond to inputs, especially energy availability, stress signaling, circadian rhythm cues. So hormones are heavily influenced by these inputs. And this is where, we always say that hormones themselves are not the problem. Hormones are simply messengers and they are responding to these inputs appropriately. Some key habits or inputs to highlight that were really relevant for Rachel's case were that she was intermittent fasting and delaying breakfast. So having dinner between 5 and 6 p.m. and then not having breakfast until 11 a.m. or later. So really long, prolonged overnight fast. Delaying food intake in the morning prolongs cortisol, adrenaline signaling, and it creates this perceived low energy state. And this can often downregulate that early cycle estrogen production and contribute to a weaker follicular foundation leading up to ovulation. So it can kind of set the stage for what's happening the rest of the cycle. She was also engaging in fasted high intensity workouts. She was going to Orange Theory in the morning with no fuel beforehand. Fasted high intensity training amplifies cortisol. But particularly, it's like throwing gasoline on the fire when layered on to an already cortisol dominant morning. So this can suppress or alter kisspeptin and gonadotropin releasing hormone signaling, which can then have this trickle down effect on LH, FSH, and sex hormone production and coordination. Rachel was also really drastically under eating carbs in an attempt to lose weight. And there wasn't really a goal or a benchmark there. It was kind of this, you know, the lower the better mentality, which we do also often see with women in practice. Insufficient carbohydrate intake, particularly for women of reproductive age, is going to force a greater reliance on cortisol for blood sugar stability. Over time, that's going to impact insulin sensitivity, digestion, and hormone production. Her meal timing overall was super erratic. So we know she was delaying breakfast. And then from there, meal timing was really erratic. Long stretches of time, really no structure or consistency to meals and snacks throughout the day. Inconsistent meal timing is a big disruptor of circadian rhythms and circadian signaling to the HPO axis, so that brain ovarian network or communication. It can drive wonky blood sugar, contribute to poor digestive function, and it can really drive sympathetic nervous system dominance. Clinically, this can be a big contributor to kind of like flatlined or flattened hormone curves and really just poor phase distinction across the cycle, which we were seeing for Rachel. Couple other notable things for Rachel's case. So she had a big maldigestion and insufficiency dysbiosis dynamic that we confirmed via stool testing. She had low stomach acid, low pancreatic enzymes, high steatocrit, was malabsorbing fats. And poor digestion and absorption is going to reduce the availability of key nutrients and cholesterol that's actually needed to build out hormones, right? And for hormone signaling. It's kind of, the concept of it's not you are what you eat, it's you are what you absorb. So maldigestion was a big factor for her. This combined with a very restrictive diet, low carb, low FODMAP, all the things, contributed to some really key nutrient deficiencies that we identified for her that were also likely impacting hormone production and signaling. Rachel had a number of circadian disruptive lifestyle habits at baseline. Her sleep schedule was erratic. She was up late at night on screens, exposed to bright light, and she wasn't getting any sunlight in the morning. Circadian disruption really disrupts and weakens that brain ovarian communication and really kind of disrupts normal hormone rhythms. And lastly, she also really lacked any type of nervous system regulation tools. She had a crazy busy schedule and she was constantly on the go from one thing to the next. Chronic sympathetic dominance, or kind of operating in chronic fight or flight, is a huge suppressor of reproductive hormones, and it definitely increases inflammatory signaling, and was likely a big piece of the puzzle for Rachel. So, continuous hormone tracking gave us the ability to really connect the dots for Rachel in a way that deeply resonated with her, validated her symptoms, and helped her to connect the dots between those symptoms, the data, and her habits specifically. Once we identified the key drivers behind Rachel's hormone patterns, the goal was not to overhaul her entire life overnight. It was really to make targeted adjustments in a kind of layered way to to the key inputs that were influencing her hormones, where we could make these strong connections. So first up, we really focused on optimizing meal timing, her fueling schedule, prioritizing breakfast within an hour or two of waking, and eating consistent meals every 3 to 4 hours throughout the day. I often say that consistent eating is one of the number one ways to make the body feel safe and to reduce stress on the body, and has a big influence on digestive function, blood sugar stability, and therefore hormones. Next was macronutrient optimization. So increasing carbohydrate intake, focusing on carb quality, and really improving overall meal composition to support her body's needs and to stabilize blood sugar. We adjusted her movement routine, kind of shifting away from those higher intensity fasted workouts to more of a focus on walking and lower impact strength training with appropriate fuel. Circadian rhythm inputs were another huge priority. So integrating morning light exposure, blue light reduction at night. So getting her some dedicated screen-free time, some downregulation time, getting on more of a consistent sleep schedule, and really overall kind of reinforcing hormonal signaling by habits that are supporting circadian rhythms. From there, we supported digestion, we incorporated nervous system regulation practices, and we did bring in and layer in targeted supplements to support nutrient repletion, gut function, while nutrition and lifestyle foundations were really being built, or rebuilt rather. So overall, the strategy was about removing conflicting signals and stressors and kind of restoring the internal conditions that allowed her system, her body, to function optimally, and specifically for her body to do what it was designed to do. It just needed some support with getting there. After 4 months of targeted intervention, we saw some really amazing shifts with Rachel's hormone data. So this is her chart about 4 months later. Not only did we see hormone levels improve, but we saw really notable shifts with quality, coordination, hormone signaling. So I think the big notable things here are that we're seeing a much more clear, kind of coordinated, progressive rise with estrogen leading up to ovulation in the follicular phase versus that kind of like womp flat line that we were seeing with her baseline chart. We're seeing a much kind of stronger, more robust LH surge in comparison to that first chart. we're seeing stronger luteal phase hormone output with both estrogen and progesterone. And overall, I think the biggest kind of shifts here are that we're actually seeing clear phase distinctions throughout the cycle, right? That look much more coordinated. We're seeing smoother transitions, less erraticness in erratic signaling, and really overall improved, hormone rhythm and efficiency, which is really exciting. So these were Rachel's clinical outcomes, or kind of the after picture. And rather than kind of walking you through every outcome here, I think what's really important to note is that um, there were really significant kind of system-wide shifts. So as Rachel's inputs or habits changed, incrementally we saw improvements with metabolic health, digestion, sleep, stress resilience, immune function, reproductive health. And we saw shifts with her hormones alongside that progressively the entire way, which was really cool. Two months after that chart snippet, Rachel conceived naturally right before she was actually gearing up for assisted fertility treatment, which was really cool. And this case highlights how shifting key nutrition and lifestyle inputs can drive really, really meaningful improvements in both hormone patterns and actual clinical outcomes and symptoms across multiple systems, because nothing acts in isolation, right? Everything is interconnected. Now I want to zoom out for a moment to really emphasize the fact that hormone tracking and hormones in general are not just about fertility. Yes, continuous hormone tracking is invaluable from a fertility perspective. But the menstrual cycle is considered a fifth vital sign for a reason. It is truly one of the most sensitive and valuable indicators that we have of overall physiological health for women of reproductive age. Hormone health is not just about fertility, and hormone health is not just about how much of a singular hormone is being produced, right? It's timing, it's rhythm, it's coordination, and it's and understanding these hormone dynamics more deeply can really just give us incredibly valuable insights into an individual's health and their symptoms. Like any tool, continuous hormone tracking does come with a few practical considerations and challenges that I think are, important to mention for anyone that is considering bringing CHT into their work with clients. The first and probably biggest thing that we see is clients' stress around tracking. So for some clients that are more hypervigilant, this, they can end up getting really hyper focused on day-to-day numbers and feeling really stressed and fearful if, values are off or they're not kind of in, an optimal range. And this is where kind of addressing things and providing a lot of education up front is the solution in my mind. So I really encourage clients to see this data as information. We want to collect information and we want to approach this very observationally. We want to approach it with curiosity and without judgment, without reactivity or alarm. It's information, and we want to bring curiosity to that and really assess for patterns and trends over time. We're not looking for perfection. Again, we're looking for patterns here. And most importantly, I feel like how you review this data with a client or patient is really key. So using, and I think first and foremost, really actually reviewing it with them and explaining it to them is a super key piece of this. But really using supportive and empowering language to help them to understand what they're seeing with confidence. The other challenge that comes up is the cost of wands, which can be a real barrier for some clients. I typically navigate this by having a conversation upfront. So if you feel that this is a really important tool for a client and it's going to provide a lot of clinical clarity and value for their case, then I think it's important to have that conversation and to talk about their budget and pros and cons, talk about the cost, make sure you're on the same page. And if needed, there might be situations where I might recommend strategic shorter term tracking or bi-monthly tracking, or depending on the client case, maybe we're tracking during key windows to kind of monitor shifts at a certain time in the cycle. So there's different ways that you can navigate this with clients. And I think just being upfront, having open communication and making sure you kind of understand, you know, budget and can be on the same page there. What I've found with CHT is that um, it's not, it doesn't just change how we interpret data, it really changes ultimately how clients actually engage with care and how confidently, as clinicians, we make decisions. Some of the key benefits for clients really include they stop seeing their bodies as unpredictable, as broken, as rebelling against them. And they start to actually understand what's happening in their body. They start to see patterns, to connect the dots, to see cause and effect. And if they experience a symptom, we have, information that is shedding light on why that might be happening. And there's action steps we can take to support that. So I find that there's a lot of value there. For clients, I found it builds trust, it builds buy-in, and it definitely, again, supports that long-term behavior change and adherence. This type of data, extremely validating for clients, especially, again, for those clients that have been told your labs look normal, but they're incredibly symptomatic. Seeing that data, I think, just really, really validates their lived experience. Big benefits for clinicians. So less guesswork. This type of data really reduces guesswork and it increases clinical confidence. So we're not making assumptions. We can actually have data to guide clinical decision making. Continuous hormone data, as I've mentioned a few times, really kind of fills in gaps, especially between more formal or traditional lab tests. And a huge benefit, of course, is the protocol individualization. So again, two clients, same diagnosis, same cycle length, but probably very different needs. And assessing hormone patterns is going to make that very clear in terms of the direction that you're going to want to go with that client. So women's health as a whole is shifting away from one size fits all recommendation. And I think that's why most of us here are in this line of work, right? We want to help, we want to really provide personalized care. And I think, women's healthcare in general is really moving away from generic plans and is really wanting to leverage data-informed care. With tools like wearables, biosensors, we now get real-time physiology outside of a clinic setting. So we can actually help clients to identify patterns and to assess, deeper dynamics that we previously could not capture. For practitioners, we're getting the ability to make those more personalized data-informed recommendations. And again, for patients, it's really creating that shift towards putting them back in the driver's seat of their health and really helping them to feel confident and in touch with their body. And I think there's nothing more powerful than that as a woman. How are we on time? I have 2 slides left, but.
You're great. You've got plenty of time.
Okay, great. So very quick, I'll just touch on this. Was thinking about, kind of hot topics in the women's health space. And I think for any practitioner clinician that is working with women, particularly women of reproductive age, it's important to be mindful of the trendy diets out there. And, I'm sure a lot of you, if you're working with women, see this as well, but we see a lot of women coming to us on very ultra low carb diets, intermittent fasting, skipping meals, restrictive diets, and a lot of extremist approaches that women are engaging in to ideally improve their health. But it's really important to understand how these more restrictive kind of diets and strategies can impact the HPO axis and, brain ovarian communication, hormone production, hormone signaling. So again, what's powerful, I think, about continuous hormone tracking is that it helps with connecting the dots in real time for clients so they can kind of see cause and effect, right? I think it's one thing to explain to an individual that, a really low carb approach or, intermittent fasting may be contributing to X, Y, and Z symptom. But being able to like make those visible connections in real time is very powerful and validating. So clients can see that relationship with their pattern, with their habits, with their hormones. So just really opens up the opportunity for a lot of very powerful, productive teaching moments. And lastly, just to kind of to summarize here, the future of women's healthcare. So I think, again, anyone who is here, I think agrees that women deserve more. Women deserve better than symptom management or symptom suppression. They deserve to understand their physiology and to really deeply understand their body and to feel confident with the feedback their body is giving them. Practitioners, us as practitioners, clinician, we deserve better tools and better data to guide clinical decision making, to really deeply personalize care and to strengthen trust with clients, with patients. So, in the right clinical context, continuous hormone tracking is really shifting women's healthcare from symptom-based care to physiology informed, from guessing in gray areas to data-driven precision, generic plans to really deeply individualized plans, and really shifting away from confusion and overwhelm to a lot of clarity and confidence. So I think a lot of benefits as a whole for both women and clinicians. And that is all I have for you.
Thank you. We've got some questions rolling in, so I'll start with a couple that we've gotten. So, um, one of the questions was kind of about how you work with your team. So, they were asking, how often were you and the team meeting with clients? How often are they coming in to see you?
Yeah, great question. So in our kind of primary one-on-one program, we see clients twice per month. And typically we work with clients for a 6-month time frame. Just
Oh, okay.
context there.
And that is usually, do they know that going in? I think sometimes that's
Yes.
a hard conversation.
Yeah, sorry
Like,
to clarify. So we have a 6-month container that's kind of the entry point for clients, and we meet with them twice per month throughout that 6-month program. And I think, for anyone working in women's health and with hormones, shifts with hormones and symptoms, it does take time, right? So the 6-month kind of container really gives us the ability to actually do this work and to see significant shifts. Beyond that, we have options for working with clients where we see them, once a month or once every other month. But the initial entry point is that 6-month commitment and twice per month meetings.
yeah, that does a really good job of setting the precedence that it's not going to happen in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And another question was, do you work with fertility clinics, if any? Do they get involved with the tracking process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't so we definitely collaborate with fertility clinics and fertility providers that, depending on the client. We don't have like a fertility clinic that we partner with or anything like that. But absolutely. And when we're working with a client and they're also working with a fertility clinic, we're sharing everything that we're doing. And we really want to support that continuity of care. So we encourage, sharing the data with their providers there. We'll communicate with providers. We'll share other lab testing that we've done, information about kind of what we're working on. So we try to support that continuity of care as much as possible, kind of streamline things for clients.
Yeah, very important for the care team aspect. Talk a little bit about lifestyle habit and what do you see is the easiest to improve for most women as far as like low hanging fruit?
Yeah, I feel like habit change is hard, man, right? It's no matter what it is, changing habits is hard. I think there's a lot of things that can sound simple on paper, but anytime we're creating new habits or shifting habits, takes energy, time, brain space to really solidify that. I would say from a lifestyle, so thinking non-nutrition perspective, I think um lifestyle strategies that are have a really big bang for their buck, I would say would be um, focusing on some of those circadian rhythm inputs. So I think a consistent wake up time, light exposure in the morning, whether it be natural sunlight or using a full spectrum, sun lamp, screen free time at night, kind of adjusting the environment at night. So maybe we're turning off big overhead lights, turning on floor lamps or dimmers. Maybe we're, putting on a pair of amber blue light blockers in the evening. So I think some of those things I would say are maybe lower hanging fruit for clients and they can have a really big impact.
Or so one person was asking, how helpful was the continuous monitoring and addressing PMDD and the methods used to improve overall, especially for fertility to become pregnant?
So first part of the question is using CHT for PMDD. So for that part of the question, I find it's very, very, very valuable in that population because there's no one way that a PMDD client presents, right? So there could be issues with estrogen. There could be issues with progesterone or the relationship between the two. There could potentially be histamine components there that are tied to estrogen. So, in terms of PMDD clients, I think there's a lot of nuance there. And being able to get this deeper data for this type of population in particular, I think is extremely valuable for pinpointing what shifts are happening, what's the relationship between these hormones during these times in the cycle where a client is very symptomatic, and also what's happening leading up to that.
Or, and I think that kind of leads into one of the questions that was in the chat. What about using it for postmenopausal women using HRT?
Yeah, so I actually don't use I think maybe Rose might be able to speak to that population more so, but we don't use the continuous hormone tracking with postmenopausal clients on HRT.
Chris, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can hop into that really quickly. We actually just recently did a webinar with Dr. Carrie Jones and Dr. Kara Fitzgerald on that exact topic. So, we have another hour and a half webinar that we can explain it fully, but it can be useful depending on what your goal is. So, those on HRT that want to ensure that they've reduced their risk, for example, we know high FSH carries risk independent of estradiol. So we really advocate for, we really need to track three things. Ensure that estradiol is actually being absorbed, that their FSH is being reduced, and of course their symptoms are being reduced as well. So we have an entire guide. I'll see if my partner Vienna can grab that and put it in the chat for you as well. But we'd encourage you to learn more through watching some of the other educational sessions.
Thank you. Okay, back to another question for Jillian. So Ginger's asking, I work mostly with peri and menopausal women. Many of them are on HRT prescribed by doctors who are not experts and do not monitor hormones. Oh, maybe this is kind of the same question here. Do you think continuous hormone chart? Yeah. Okay, sorry, Ginger. I missed that was also your question. So same thing. Same question there. Definitely some interest in that space in the the perimenopausal and the postmenopausal group.
And I will say too, we definitely have more experience with the perimenopausal population, and I know there's a great webinar on perimenopause too that Rose, you guys have, I think.
Yes.
We can get those.
Yeah, we can get those resources over too. But in general, yeah, we can talk about perimenopause for an entire hour or 2 hour webinar. So it's a whole other topic. But the short answer is hormone tracking helpful? Yes. And I can maybe show some chart examples in my next section too.
I think that was all of the clinical questions. So I am going to end the educational portion of the webinar. I did put the CE survey in the chat, so make sure you take that survey to get your CE certificate. And now Rose is going to talk about Mira. So if you have questions specific to the product, Daniel, I saw you had one about the product. So I just want to make sure we have time to answer or ask more questions at the end of that. So Rose, I'll turn it over to you to talk a bit about the product.
Wonderful. Thank you for those who are able to stay on. If you are a practitioner who is interested in learning more about this type of hormone testing, we'd encourage you to meet with our team. We will educate you on how to use it in your practice the best way. We have all of our resources and content that we give you, and we also give you the opportunity to trial it yourself. So it's a device and a 1-month supply of wands, so it's 30 wands. So please scan the QR code or click on the link in the chat if you are interested in meeting with us. You're not committing to anything by attending one of our onboarding sessions to learn more about it with our clinical team. So this QR code will come back at the end as well, and we put it in the chat. But for those that are not familiar with hormone testing with Mira, it is a urine-based test. So patients get a one-time device, and then they have one-time use wands. So they collect a first morning urine sample. We use first morning really for two main reasons. One, it's easy to make a habit out of it, so much more consistency. And also it's because it's naturally concentrated. Generally, people are not eating and drinking throughout the night, and so they are naturally concentrating that urine. So they collect their sample in the morning, they take out one of their one-time use disposable wands, they dip it for 20 seconds in the urine, they cap it, they put it in the machine, and then after either 16 or 21 minutes, we now have a result that's available on the front of the device, and then it Bluetooth syncs into their free phone app. So patients see the data themselves as it progresses, kind of like a CGM, and then clinicians see the data in real time within our provider dashboard, which I'll talk about more in detail in a moment. So we are testing the 4 major reproductive hormones that fluctuate. So they provide us the most insight into what the cycle is doing. So we track estrogen in the form of E3G, which is the main urinary metabolite of serum E2. Then we track LH and FSH directly, and then the main metabolite of progesterone, serum progesterone, as PDG. And so, as Jillian was explaining, these hormones are dynamic. They're changing from one day to the next, but a normal progression should be this nice rising estrogen towards ovulation. It declines, has a second rise. We get this nice LH and FSH surge together. There's coordination here. And then we want to see that nice big rise of progesterone afterwards. So a lot can go kind of wrong with creating hormones and having them be dynamically changing throughout the cycle. And so that's, again, where it becomes super valuable to actually be able to see what's happening. If we think about other solutions, and Jillian went over this really well already, but someone who's maybe tracking to confirm that they've ovulated, so a temperature, or maybe they're getting a blood test of progesterone, that tells you one data point, a progesterone one time. Yes, they ovulated, but how robust was that ovulation? Is this optimal? Is their progesterone high enough, long enough? So really, we need a lot more details. So as you can see, really, this is moving out of a single snapshot in time or app prediction-based model, moving into dynamically changing hormone tracking, just like a CGM. So we know how CGMs really can empower patients to see what actions they take, what it does to their glucose data. The same way with the hormones, patients really can see when I underfuel or over-exercise or don't take care of myself, my hormones really are affected. So a quick note on our technology. So many times people are familiar with LH test strips or even pregnancy tests. That technology is nanogold based. So it's a dye, basically. The urine is picking up antibodies and then the color darkens. And so patients maybe manually read it with the naked eye, or they might be having a camera phone or a device that reads that. Those are not the technology that Mira uses, actually. We use a fluorescent lateral flow immunoassay. This provides us much more accurate, precise number values instead of just positive, negative, or like a kind of a range. So oftentimes people are familiar with Clearblue, for example. Clearblue uses nanogold technology in qualitative measurements of either low, high, or peak. So again, Mira is really that next step up of hormone tracking, but in the convenience of the patient's home. So just a couple of notes here about what is available to the patient versus the provider. So one, this is direct to consumer, so patients do not have any barrier to getting it. There's no prescription. There's not anything keeping a patient from testing their hormones at home, which is really the foundation of what Mira believes, is that patients deserve to have access to their own data. It's available internationally, so it can be shipped pretty much everywhere. And patients who are working with a clinician do have access to our VIP customer support. So they are given priority responses if they have any technical issues or if they need anything. As you can see, we are, of course, certified high quality. We're not just tech, but we're also research backed. So we have many researchers who use us. And this is comparing our results to serum, but also comparing to other urine-based tests. And we are also ultrasound validated. So those who are using it to confirm that they've ovulated or to try to conceive, we do have ultrasound validation as well. We have a lot of users across the globe, but to me, the most exciting is the number of clinicians. So we have 4,000 clinicians who use us at this point. And to me, helping a patient is one thing, but when we can help a provider help a patient, that's going to be exponentially better, because we know patients have better outcomes when they have someone to assist them on this journey, hold them accountable, and tweak their plan as they go. So I like to think that the more clinicians that have these tools, the exponential help that we're going to see with these patients. So from the provider side, of course, we do have partnership options. So if you want to make this cheaper for your patients, if you want to buy in bulk or have it, in your practice, you can do that multiple ways. We also want to support you as a clinician. We are always education first. And so we provide webinars and Q&A sessions with clinical experts such as Dr. Carrie Jones. We also offer one-on-one meetings with our clinical team if you want help interpreting the data or you're kind of new to hormones. We have a provider frequently asked questions page and many, many documents, including case reports and other things. And as I mentioned before, we do offer, it is remote monitoring. So you as a provider can see the data in real time. So Jillian explained this really well, but just to summarize, really hormone tracking is kind of the core of everything else. Because if you get a one-time, let's say, blood test on a random day or maybe even timed, it really does not tell you what happened the entire cycle. But when you have the entire cycle and then you see that data point, it makes sense within the context of the cycle. So we're elevating the other lab values that you're getting, whether that be serum or a more comprehensive test such as a Dutch test. We also are enabling you and the patient to do very personalized treatment with phase-specific nutrition, lifestyle interventions. And the patient will completely understand what you mean when you say, do this in your follicular phase and do this in your luteal phase. They will have complete understanding of that because they see the hormone patterns themselves. It also helps you to interpret your other data points that you're obtaining from the patient in a much more valuable way, because we know that women's metabolism changes from their follicular phase into their luteal phase. And so when you see someone's, let's say, glucose data in their follicular phase compared to their luteal phase, and they do worse in their luteal phase, it's likely not that they fell off their diet or did not follow your plan as well. It's because of that metabolic change that happened based on the phases of the cycle. So again, just in general, the hormone tracking really is that key to making everything else make sense. So when this is at the core, you can build off of that and have all of your other data very enhanced and much more valuable. So often we get asked, well, what about other types of hormone tracking? So as Jillian pointed out, we are not trying to replace serum values or other sort of testing, like if you're doing cortisol testing. We really are complementing other things that you do. We complement serum, we complement Dutch or ZRT. We also complement if someone is tracking their temperature or tracking their mucus patterns, so those other biometrics that they can track. But we are replacing other types of cycle mapping. So if it's something that a patient is collecting and mailing in, we really are replacing that because we are remote, real time, and that really changes everything because we're now not looking at a cycle that happened last month. We're looking at the cycle as it progresses right now. So many people are asking about the cost. So this is a quick breakdown of the cost. So the device does need to be a one-time purchase. So you need the device to read the wands. And then you need a pack of wands. So I'll go over this first example. This is our most commonly purchased now, our Ultra 4. It tracks all 4 hormones at once. So the cost after the 30% discount that you share to your client, it's 30% off, making the initial investment $189. So that is for 30 days of testing. They can test every day. They can test every other day. That's up to them. They can test, as Jillian was saying, phase specific. So they get 31s. They decide how often they test. Then if they want to test another amount of time, so let's say they're doing daily testing for 3 months of everyday testing, their investment's going to be $383. So for that cost, it may be life-changing for the patient, or for the next patient, it may be that cost is too much for their budget. And then you say, okay, let's do more of a reduced testing plan. Have you test less often, or maybe a baseline, and then you do your interventions for 3 months, and then we'll test again to see what progress you've made. So you can really personalize this based on your patient's budget. We are HSA, FSA eligible. So if a patient has a health savings account, they can get your discount first and then also use their HSA for the remaining balance. And if your patient has the added benefit of a fertility benefit coverage, such as Carrot, Maven, Win Fertility, then they can potentially have all of their products paid for through that employer benefit. So always check if your patient has that resource. So hopefully that answered all the cost questions. If you have one that I didn't answer, please pop it in the chat or into the Q&A so I can make sure to address it. But really to summarize the pricing, it's an initial investment, but then they decide how much it costs them moving forward, how much testing they want to do. So the provider dashboard that I've mentioned a couple of times, the patients see their data in their free app. You as a clinician see their data real time as well. So once the patient has it in their phone app, then you see it at the same time. And for those that choose maybe not to have a cell phone or not to have a smartphone, an iPad or wherever they can download an app works as well. So it's a very simple process for patients to consent to sharing data with you. They get given, or you get given, a QR code that's unique to you. When the patient scans it, asks them consent, do you agree to share data with so-and-so? And when they click yes, they consent, then they get uploaded into your dashboard. So it's a very simple process. If you're in a visit with someone and then you discover, oh, you've actually already been hormone testing with Mira for the last 2 months, you can share that QR code right then and there and immediately have access to their historical data. And again, be able to have more data points to be able to make decisions. Excuse me. So this is an example of what the dashboard looks like. So your patients are along the left-hand side. The hormone data is in the center. A cycle summary is available as well. And this data can be made into a generated report, so you can save it into your files or your electronic medical record. Or of course, you can print it out and write on it and then give it to the patient. So it's a very helpful tool to generate this report. Patients can generate and the provider can as well. As I mentioned before, we do give all the technical support is our team. So if you're thinking to yourself, I don't have time to answer patients' questions about another product or another app, that's what our team does. So within the app, they can get assistance. They can also email our VIP customer support. So really my summary here is, as a clinician, you have access to our clinical team. We respond to you ideally within 24 hours, but at least within 2 days, we respond to you. If you need anything, please reach out to us. If the patient needs anything, then have them reach out to our VIP customer support. So we want to be, again, very available to you. We also offer you a patient handout if you want to, you've explained Mira to a patient in a visit and they want to look it up more on their own. This is a front and back handout. Front is all about what Mira is. The back is all specific to your clinic. So your discount code, your QR code for them to share data with you. And then we have our patient-facing frequently asked questions along the bottom, as well as a reminder of that VIP support email. So again, if you are someone who is interested to learn more, scan the QR code or book the link. We'll meet with you, talk about how it's useful in your practice. And then if you decide to take the next step, we'll send you that sample for you to trial. And again, that sample is a device and 30 wands for you to test out on yourself, a patient, a family member, a coworker. It doesn't matter to us. We just want you to have that firsthand experience of what it's really like to be able to use it. So I'll pause here for any questions. I do have charts because I do see some questions about things that are very specific. So I have additional charts that I suspected you would want to see. But I'll pause here just for a second to see if anybody had any questions about what I've shared so far.
I think most of the questions are still around the postmenopause woman, right? So there's some questions about what does that cycle look like? It obviously looks very different than a woman, who's before menopause. So I think if you have any more information about that, that's most of the questions are coming from.
Yeah, happy to answer a few. And then I'll just say we are holding a Q&A for anyone who attends the intro call with us. You also get access then to our roundtable discussions, which happens to be next week with Dr. Carrie Jones. So if you book a call with us, we'd be happy to get you into that roundtable as well, in case I don't fully answer your question today. But let's look at what is Mira commonly used for. So fertility care, perimenopause, hormone imbalances. And so let's look at some of these chart examples. So bear with me, I just have to skip through to get to the one that I want here. So this is an example of perimenopause. So this patient is 45, she has irregular cycles, and she might have a plethora of symptoms. But when we look at her data, we really can see why her symptoms may be changing within this long 50-day cycle. So when we look here, I'll get my little cursor out to draw. The first 25 days of her cycle, she had very low estrogen. As a reminder, that's the black lines here. So it's very suppressed, very low estrogen. And then she has very high fluctuating LH. I like to say LH is kind of doing whatever it wants. And then we have this high FSH. So this is one distinct pattern of hormones that she had for the first 25 days. There is a study that's brand new, I think within the last 3 months, that showed that women with high FSH tend to have more symptoms. So of course it's not proven to be causation, it's correlation or association right now. But this patient with this high FSH definitely can be having symptoms related to that, not just the low estrogen, which is what we previously blamed the symptoms on. Then you'll notice there's this distinct line. And the example, Carrie and I like to explain this as this high FSH. Imagine that to be tapping the back of a glass ketchup bottle. So the glass ketchup bottle is the ovary, and the brain is sending the FSH signal, and it's tapping the back, tap, 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 telling the ovary, do something, do something. And then finally, the ovary is like, okay, fine. And it explodes all the ketchup out of the bottle. And we get all of this FSH that is not exactly what we wanted, but that's how the body responded. So now we move from an estrogen deficient state to now excessive estrogen. And so again, this patient, her symptoms may be changing, and to her it doesn't make any sense, but the hormone pattern actually makes sense of those hormones now. And if this particular patient would have went and got a blood draw done or had maybe a cycle day 21 test done, it makes sense that that value that we obtained, it was true, it was real, but it didn't tell us the entire pattern of what happened. So this patient got her blood drawn here, let's say, and her doctor says, you have low estrogen. That statement is true, but it didn't continue. This patient actually then ended up with very high estrogen. So if that test would have been done over here, that blood test would have said, oh, you have too much estrogen. You don't need estrogen therapy. You have too much estrogen, when all of that is true. But now we have the entire context to make sense of it. And so we really are seeing that HRT can be more personalized. So I'll give an example here. If this patient had been started on, let's say, estrogen therapy over here, potentially it may have prevented this really high estrogen. We'll never know in this patient's case, but we would have stopped the feedback of high FSH. But let's say it didn't stop this high estrogen. We actually have a case, which maybe Vienna can go find it quick. It's the patient who donated her kidney to her sister. So anyway, we had in this case, so this patient had been put on an estradiol patch, and it was too late, let's say, and her own body was going to make this estrogen. When the patient sees this really high estrogen, she may actually decide to pause her estrogen patch because this high mountain of estrogen is not from an estrogen patch. This is her ovary. Her ovary is overproducing beyond what that patch is giving her. And so that can be where it truly becomes personalized HRT and potentially making it so patients are not suffering unnecessarily when, they were maybe fine on their HRT, but then 3 months later, 6 months later, they have a whole new set of symptoms and they don't understand why their HRT may not be working like it was before. And that's because the underlying hormone pattern itself is actually changing, and they don't know that if they're not testing. So that's one example. If you have a question about what I just said, please put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A, but I'll keep going in the meantime. So we've talked about this a little bit of like the importance of knowing what day you're doing your test and having context of it. So I just want to give an example here of when a patient went and got their blood test done on cycle day 19, 20, 21, which is typically seen as that mid-luteal. When you look at this patient's data, we actually see that if she would have gotten her blood work done on day 19, 20, 21, potentially the clinician would have interpreted it as this high estrogen is problematic because they think it's a mid-luteal test. They think they're after ovulation. Oh no, this patient's estrogen dominant or phase specific too high of estrogen. When in fact, this high estrogen that they captured on that one-time blood test or one-time Dutch, for example, it was actually her ovulatory estrogen. This estrogen is supposed to be there because she's having her trigger to ovulate here on day 20/21. And so what could be mislabeled as bad, that estrogen is actually good. So again, having full context of the cycle really does matter. And if you want more details on that, we did go over it again in that perimenopause webinar. Let's see, there's a question in the chat. I assume with really high testosterone. So it didn't get asked, but very clear. We don't currently track testosterone. We get asked that a lot. If we're going to, we are exploring it, but right now we don't. The goal of our product is really to be what fluctuates a lot and what matters when it fluctuates. And so things that generally speaking, we need to test at least 4 times within the cycle. So testosterone is being explored for that. But it's on our roadmap, but I don't have any other, timeline or anything like that for you. So hopefully you've seen from all the cases that we've shown already that really seeing the pattern matters instead of just like a one-time test. So just I've selected a couple of charts that show this. So 2 patients may approach you, they're both 50 and they say, I have irregular cycles. That's fine. But the actual hormone pattern within those irregular cycles does matter. So we have here 2 patients side by side, 50-year-olds, and one is ovulating, one is not. How do I know that? Well, this patient on the left is ovulating, and I know that because we have rising coordinated estrogen. We have her LH surge still, and then her progesterone changes. Now, are these ideal levels? No, but she is 50, so I'll give her a little slack that they're not ideal anymore. But we could, depending on the patient and the provider situation, this could be treatable. So sometimes a provider will give phase-specific progesterone for this. So not just take progesterone, but take it timed within this part of the cycle. The patient on the right, I know she's not ovulating because she has only estrogen changes, no LH surge, no progesterone. So these, again, 2 women side by side are distinctly different. And so I suspect their interventions are going to be very different as well. Patients, this is the same case as Jillian's, where they just have low hormone production that could be missed. We also find things like an attempt to ovulate, but then the patient fails to ovulate, kind of like Jillian's first example of that non-ovulatory LH surge, where it's like, oh, the body really, it looks like it's trying, but then it doesn't. So we see examples of that. I showed a high estrogen already. This is a low progesterone example. We also see things like maybe you yourself or someone you know has said, I don't understand perimenopause. I get a period and then 2 weeks later I get another period. We're identifying that probably more often than we thought. These are very early ovulations. So they are ovulatory cycles, even though they only are, let's say, 15 days between periods. They're just ovulating very early. Again, not normal, not healthy. But in perimenopause, we can get things like loop cycles and early ovulations and that sort of thing. We didn't talk about this yet, but many times patients who don't have periods are kind of left out of the discussion. Maybe they don't have a period because of an IUD, or they've had their uterus removed but still have their ovaries, or they had a uterine ablation. These women still can have hormone fluctuations that are currently being ignored. And so my basic question to all clinicians is, when you have a new patient to you, do you know if they're ovulating? And if they're between puberty and menopause, you really have to find that out. Not just do they have bleeds, but do they ovulate? So do they have estrogen? Do they get an LH surge? Do they have progesterone? Because as I've hopefully already showed to you before, they can have maybe estrogen, but no progesterone. And that is not ideal hormone balance. And that can lead to things like uterine hyperplasia or PMS symptoms and all sorts of things. So this particular chart is a patient with a Mirena IUD in place. And she was, to her surprise, she didn't think she was ovulating. She does not get bleeds. But we could, within 3 weeks, tell that she is still ovulating. She's still having hormone fluctuations. And so her symptoms that were cyclic were actually hormone cyclic. And so she was able to get help for that. Let's see. I think that's my last chart. I did skip over all the information about glucose changes in the cycle. So if anyone wants to hear about that, I can talk about that. Otherwise, I'll take questions. I think I've been trying to keep up.
I don't see any questions. So we did see some
Yes to the glucose.
So I think they would love to see it.
Oh, anyone who cares about what people eat love the glucose conversation.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'll be happy to go over this one. So many of you already know this, if not all of you, that women's state of their cycle and their metabolic current pattern changes how they respond to glucose and how their insulin operates. But in the clinical, or I should say, literature, it was kind of unclear. There was some studies that said, yes, there's association between hormone patterns and phases of the cycle and glucose fluctuations, and some said there wasn't. And these researchers out of the University of Toronto really set to settle it and see if there's an association. And they noted that in the past, it was difficult to come to a good conclusion because of limitations with two things. Limitation of the menstrual cycle. So in most studies, they were asking women, what are your cycles like? And when was your last period? But they weren't actually tracking, are they ovulating? What are the hormones doing? So it was a really poor tracking of the menstrual cycle. And then the other side that was challenging was the ability to get people to get their blood sugar checked and going to get their blood drawn was typically done infrequently. So with the advances of technology of things like CGMs and Mira with hormone tracking, these researchers, again, really set out to find the association. So they had 49 participants using Mira, Fitbit, and a CGM, and they found, no surprise to us, a significant association between the glucose levels within the menstrual cycle. And so this is on the right, their depiction of like the progression through the cycle and how the glucose changes. But I find a specific chart example actually helps the most. So as you guys know, when someone is in their follicular phase, when they have high estrogen, this high estrogen tends to have them be slightly insulin sensitive. So it's a improved management of their glucose. When they then, so if they're using a CGM, we typically see them within range more often. They, when their glucose goes up, it comes back in range faster. And so this improved insulin sensitivity really leads to less glucose fluctuations, glucose within range more often. When the same participant moves to their luteal phase, now that they're in their high progesterone state, we know high progesterone fundamentally changes their metabolism because it makes them slightly insulin resistant, or I'll say a little bit less insulin sensitive. So, and if we think about that from a biological standpoint, it makes sense, right? Because when someone is after ovulation, their body has moved from a, instead of trying to conceive, they've now moved to a prepare for implantation, prepare for possible pregnancy. And so progesterone, when we break it down, actually means pro-gestation, pro-pregnancy. And so it's essentially moving to a pregnancy state. And so this high progesterone wants to promote growth. And so it makes the body, again, slightly insulin resistant or slightly decreased insulin sensitivity. And so what we find is these women now are prone to more glucose fluctuations. They're out of range more often, or it takes longer to get back into range. And really the focus now can shift for this person. Instead of kind of blaming themselves for doing worse at one part of the cycle than the other, they now really see this as a biological change. My metabolism changes after I ovulate. The studies that we did a webinar with Dr. Sarah Hill, who wrote the book, The Period Brain, or she also wrote the book, Your Brain on Birth Control. She talks about the studies that showed that women's caloric needs change about 200 to 250 more calories in that luteal phase. And so women often can feel maybe blaming themselves. Why am I so hungry? Or why can't I stick to the diet that I did 2 weeks ago? Well, what they don't understand is how their biology has changed. So when we have this now fundamental understanding of the cycle, and the patients can see it, they see when I'm in my follicular, when I'm in my luteal phase, they can do things that are timed within the cycle. So whether that be their diet, their exercising, what supplements they take, they can proactively care for themselves better, knowing that how they respond to glucose is going to be different. So that really is, changing the dynamics around really women's health related to glucose. So hopefully, Michelle, that was everything you hoped it would be.
We have a few more minutes if anybody has any last minute questions. Oh, yeah, Michelle said it was perfect. She was we had someone pop in the chat.
Great.
Do you have that study?
Oh, yes, of course. Yep. I will have Vienna grab it, but I'll move to the slide where it's at the bottom as well if you want to start typing it in.
And you have a copy of the slides.
Oh, yes.
In the
Yep.
resources, so
Yep.
you can definitely get it there as well. All right, and lots of thank yous. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rose and Jillian both. This was really a wonderful topic. And I hope everyone enjoyed the information. Like I said, don't forget you have the slides to both Rose's presentation and Jillian, so you can go back and look at those. And the QR code to sign up for a practitioner call is also in there in Rose's slide.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you both so much, and I hope everyone has a lovely evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.